أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليكم. Inshallah, we'll continue with our discussion. We're gonna move on to chapter 3 of al-Halaqa al-Ula. In the third chapter, and as a matter of fact, in chapter 3, 4, and chapter 5, we're gonna just summarize the discussion of Shahid Sadr because there's not anything technical mentioned in there. There's a lot of history and a lot of just analysis that he is mentioning. Once again, because this book is written for complete beginners, he goes through pretty much 5 chapters of just very, very introductory, contents. So I'm not gonna read them line by line like we did in the first lesson, but I will summarize precisely what he is trying to say in these chapters. In chapter 3, the title of it is Ilm al-Usul Mantiq al-Fiqh, that the discipline of usul, the science and the study of usul, is the mantiq for the fiqh. Okay, it is like the logic for the fiqh. So what does that mean? What he's trying to say in this chapter is that, look, when you study mantiq, when you study logic, what is logic, right? Logic is an instrumental science. It is an instrumental subject, meaning what? That you don't study logic just for the sake of studying logic. It doesn't have any inherent importance or value. But the fact that you study mantiq so that, firstly, it teaches you the principles and the methodologies of making sure that when you are thinking about anything in life, that you think correctly and you think properly, and that you do not make any fallacies while you are thinking. So you study logic, and then you go and you apply that logic and you apply that thinking in different subjects. For example, you apply it in philosophy, you apply it in even in science and other places, right? Because and when you go into philosophy, for example, there's a specific way you are expected to think. Okay, you cannot go into philosophy and start thinking like a scientist. Okay, philosophy is very, very theoretical in the sense, and science is very practical. So the way you're going to think about concepts and the way you're going to think about topics and the way you're going to analyze and make arguments in philosophy is going to be very different than the way you're going to do it in science, or the way you're going to do it in, for example, in any other subject, right? So Shahid Sadr is making this sort of analogy over here. He's saying that just like you have to think, there's a way of thinking in certain subjects, and mantiq is that basic subject that you have to study in order to be able to think properly in other subjects. Usul is also like the mantiq, but it is the mantiq for fiqh. So once you study usul, it is actually telling you the way and the methodology and the process of thinking correctly when you want to derive a legal ruling, when you want to engage in fiqh. Remember, fiqh was the process of deriving a hukm shari, process of deriving law, right? So that process of deriving law, well, usul is teaching you that process, okay? And if you can learn usul properly, it will protect you and keep you safe from making blunders and making errors when you are deriving the fiqhi law and when you're doing ijtihad, basically. Okay, so that's kind of what he's saying, and he's talking about the importance of ilm al-usul in the process of deriving law. He says, well, that's kind of obvious now, because if it is the mantiq for fiqh, if it is like the science of logic for jurisprudence, well, obviously it's important, because you cannot go into jurisprudence and you don't know how to think. Okay, so the example sometimes, he himself gives is that imagine you have, all these pieces of wood over here, and you have, like, let's say, different shapes and different sizes of wooden pieces, but you're not a carpenter. You don't know you don't know how to bring these things together. You don't know how to think correctly with respects to carpentry, and you may make a chair that is, I don't know, dysfunctional or doesn't work properly, or if you sit on it, it will break. And that is because you did not really learn the the logic or the process of thinking correctly on how to use these wooden pieces and how to put them together. So when you go into fiqh, it's kind of just like, all these narrations are here and one narration is there. Um, you know, there's different types of narration, different types of subjects, and when you come across them, it's just like these wooden pieces. You don't really know what to do with them. Okay, and if whatever you decide to do without having studied usul, you're gonna make a mess. You're gonna, mess things up. So from there, he kind of goes on, and he extends that point to basically saying that usul and fiqh are, you can compare them to saying theory and application, right? So usul is the theory, and he's basically saying it is not enough for you to just learn the theory. You have to also engage in fiqh, and that is where the application is. And he makes a very important point here. He's saying that, look, sometimes people are very, very good at the theory side, but doesn't mean they're going to be necessarily good in the application. Okay, just because you are, you have studied a degree and you have a lot of theoretical knowledge, everybody knows that once you go into the work field and when you go into the practical world, things are very different, and the way you apply the theories sometimes is different and whatnot. So he's making the same comparison over here. He says that usul is the theory. You have to learn it properly. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at fiqh. Fiqh is a different aspect and dimension, and you basically have to go and then practice that application. And if for those of you who don't know, one of the ways, they say that the marja, if you want to follow a marja, he should be a'lam, he should be the most learned. What is the definition of the most learned? What do you mean most learned? How can you evaluate someone's knowledge in ijtihad? Many of the jurists, this is what they say. They say the a'lam is that person, is that jurist who has the best ability to apply the usul on the fiqh. So the a'lam is one who has the best application of the theories. Okay, so whatever theories they have that they have concluded in usul, who applies it the best? Because once again, it's gonna become very difficult and very complicated, because you're gonna learn so many different principles for you to be able to bring all of them, or a significant amount of them, and apply them consistently again and again and again on different issues, different narrations, different types of content. You will need some practice on that. So that's another very important point that he is mentioning, that usul is the theory, fiqh is the application, and you actually need to be good in both of them. Okay, so he's saying some people think that if you have become a genius in usul, then that's enough. That's enough for us to acknowledge your greatness. He says that's not true. Just because you're good at usul doesn't mean you're going to be good at the actual fiqh. Fiqh is the application. In order to be a good mujtahid, in order to be a strong mujtahid, you need to have both, basically. So that's another thing. He says that's basically what chapter 3 was about. Chapter 4, he says it is called التفاعل بين الفكر الأصولي والفكر الفقهي. The interaction between the usuli way of thinking and the fiqhi way of thinking. Basically what he's saying over here is that, look, obviously we know in the earlier first 150 years of Islam, there was no such thing as usul al-fiqh, basically. It was just fiqh. And he says because the topics were kind of straightforward, the experiences that Muslims were having were kind of very similar, but eventually as the Muslim society kept growing, and they were encountering new issues, they were having newer interactions, and things started to get complex. People started to ask more complicated questions, and the imams were answering, and other jurists were answering these questions, trying to answer these questions. And then they kind of eventually realized that, there is something that is repeatedly coming in this process of fiqh, right? And so then therefore they decided to, finally separate these two subjects, which we have already discussed in the first lesson, that look, fiqh was created first, and then the usul was created because they realized there are so many common elements that keep appearing every single time. We will just create a separate science and discuss it. Now, what's interesting is that in our narrations, you will find plenty of narrations where the imams actually mention these usuli principles, right? Sometimes a companion asks a question, and maybe this companion lives really far the Imam, instead of giving him a very particular answer, will just tell him a principle. Okay, he said, look, for example, don't break your yaqeen. If you are on a yaqeen, don't break it if you have a doubt. That's a principle that will later on become a principle of istishab, for example. One simple principle, but it is used so much in fiqh today. But the Imam gave that principle. Or, for example, he may give other principles as well. For example, everything is allowed or halal until proven otherwise. That's a principle. That's an usuli principle. Okay, so you basically go with that. So the Imams were alluding to these principles as well. But once again, it was not really yet made into a separate discipline. So he's basically talking about the interaction, how these two interacted. And basically he's saying, remember, they were one. Before it got separated, they were one and the same. And the reason why they were one and the same is because they are connected. You cannot do fiqh, you cannot derive law without the fiqh principles, the khasa, remember the anasir al-khasa, the specific principles, and the anasir al-mushtarika, the common elements. He says you could not derive law without these two. So just because they become separated, it doesn't now mean that there is no relationship between these two. He says no, they are still interacting and they still have to be together. So he has, that point that he's mentioning over here. Once again, there's a lot of other history over here, which I'm kind of skipping through. If you're interested, it is translated. The book is translated into English, and you can kind of go through this yourself. Chapter 5 is called Jawaz Amaliyat al-Istinbat. Is it permissible to do istinbat? Is it even allowed to derive law? Is it allowed to do ijtihad, basically? That's what he says. And obviously the reason why he's bringing this is because the Akhbari scholars believed you could not do ijtihad. Okay? What does he do in this chapter? He does a historical discussion on the word ijtihad. Right? Why did the Akhbari say you could not do ijtihad? The reason why they said you cannot do ijtihad is because our own narrations say you cannot do ijtihad. So they're right. Our narrations, we do have narrations that condemn ijtihad and say ijtihad is haram and wrong. And so look, we do have narrations. But, the scholars are saying that when the Imams alayhimus salam are saying don't do ijtihad, they are not talking about the ijtihad that we are doing. They're talking about qiyas. And we are not doing qiyas. Aslan, the Shias don't accept qiyas. So he does a bit of a historical analysis on the word ijtihad and how it went through different phases, and that's kind of what he does. And he tries to basically argue that it is allowed to do ijtihad the way we are doing it today, meaning deriving law. And he says we are deriving it based off of certainty. We are not deriving it based off of qiyas and speculation and stuff like that. So that's kind of like his analysis. He goes in he makes references to a scholar named Ibn Junayd. There's an article about it on Iqra Online. You can check it out. Anyways, it's mostly history. And as I said, if you want to do a history of Usul al-Fiqh, it's very lengthy, and inshallah we can do that later on in a separate series. So this was chapter 5. Inshallah, we will begin with the actual usuli discussion today in this lesson, and that is from chapter 6. So look, first 5 lessons he just gave basic introductions, and now inshallah we will start with chapter 6, which is, you can say, the beginning of usul. Now what does he do over here? So in this chapter, it is called al-Hukm al-Shar'i wa taqsimuhu. Okay, the Hukm Shar'i and its division. Now look, if you recall, how did he define usul al-fiqh? He says, look, we know that ilm al-usul, in ilm al-usul, we study the al-anasir al-mushtarika. We study the common elements. Okay, what common elements? The common elements that come and appear in the process of deriving law, in the process of deriving al-hukm al-shar'i. So look, what is the definition? The definition of usul al-fiqh is that it is the study of the common elements that are utilized in the process of deriving a hukm shari, a legal ruling, a rule basically, hukm shari. So he says, okay, we kind of figured out what anasir al-mushtaraka is. We know what istinbat is. Okay, we know what anasir al-mushtaraka is now, common elements, because we did an example in the previous lesson. So we figured out common element in the previous lesson was hujjiyatul duhur and hujjiyah khabar thiqa, these type of things. Okay, we know what that is. We know what istinbat is. Istinbat is the process of deriving the law, which we also did an example last session, with the 3 examples, right? But now it says it is the process of deriving law, common elements that are utilized in the process of deriving al-hukm al-shar'i, a hukm shari. He is going to explain what is this hukm shari. Okay, what is this law, deriving law? What law? This is something that is important. He's going to basically talk about it in this chapter. Okay. He says, تعريف الحكم الشرعي. Okay, this is important because Shahid Sadr gives a different definition to previous scholars of the past. Okay, what does he say? He says, look, al-hukm al-shar'i is huwa at-tashri' al-Sadr. It is a legislation that is sort of given, or it emanates from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لِتَنْظِيمِ حَيَاةِ الْإِنسَانِ. Done. That's the definition. What's the definition? Definition is, it is a legislation that emanates from Allah, or Allah gives for the purpose of organizing human life. For the purpose of organizing human life. That's it. That's his definition. والخطابات الشرعية في الكتاب والسنة مبرزة للحكم وكاشفة عنه وليست الحكم الشرعي نفسه. Okay? He says the actual narrations or the actual ayat in the Quran or in the hadith, they are not hukm shari. They're just khitab, they're just statements. They are not hukm shari on their own. Rather, they just kind of unveil and uncover for you, and they signify for you what the hukm shari is. Okay? It is not hukm shari on its own. Okay? The reason why he is saying this is because in the past, scholars would say a hukm shari is this khitabatu shar'iyya. The hadith, if the hadith says لا يرتمس الصائم, for example, the sa'im, the one who is fasting, does not submerge their head in water, underwater, they will say, yeah, this is a hukm shari. Okay? Shahid Sadr is saying that's not a hukm shari. Hukm shari, like that statement is just a khitab, it's just a statement that is appearing in the words in human words over here. But it signifies and it points towards what the hukm shari is. It uncovers for us. So that narration, what does it uncover for us? It uncovers for us that al-irtimas haram. Okay? The irtimas of a person who is fasting is haram. That is the hukm shari. Hukm shari is a ruling basically. Something is haram, something is wajib. La yartamisu as-sa'im doesn't say al-irtimasu haram. It just says, yeah, a sa'im shouldn't be doing this. Okay, because the problem is that khitab could mean, what if it said, what if that statement meant, what if the imam was just saying that as a, not haram? What if he's saying it as a makruh, or, for example, he may be saying it as an advice? What if he's just giving some sort of an advice? Yeah, it's better not to do it. And it's not haram or makruh even, which is called al-hukm al-irshadi. We'll maybe study this much later on, but what if it is not even that? What if it's just some personal advice, or what if he's saying something that, out of his personal preference? Yeah, it's better not to, if a person is fasting, it's better not to do. That statement in Arabic could actually mean those 3 things, by the way. Okay, it could actually mean those 2-3 things, which is how the Arabic. So you just figure out from your context and from the fahm of the urf what it could mean. But regardless, that statement is not the hukm shari. That statement is gonna do dalalat, is gonna signify what the hukm shari is. Okay, what does it mean? Well, let me give you an example. If you see a red light, right? the red light isn't a command, isn't the code. So for example, there's a law that says every car must stop at a red light. Okay, that's a law, right? That law is written and codified somewhere in some book in the court, in the Canadian or wherever your country's a legal system. That law is legislated in your country's legal system. Okay, when you see a red light, the red light is not the legal code. The legal code is sitting in a book somewhere. That's where it's actually written. That red light just points to the fact that there is a legal code written somewhere in a book that says stopping at a red light is mandatory. You cannot cross the red light. So you see the difference? The red light is what will be like the ayat of the Quran or the hadith, but the actual law is something with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has legislated that law. It is in His knowledge. He that knowledge, He legislates it, and it comes down to us in the form of either an ayat of the Quran or the hadith or wherever. Okay, any other way. I mean, these are the two main ways. But you have ijma and those type of discussions that will come later on as well. Okay, so that is a key difference that Shahid Sadr is making over here. Okay, why does this have any implications and so on? Maybe it does, but we're not here. I'm not gonna discuss that right now. But I hope that example became clear with the red light example and the actual law, which is written in some code book, and that is preserved in the parliament or wherever these things are preserved. I don't even know. Okay, so that's what he is saying. So he says, based on my definition, it shows that the famous definition is mistaken. What is the famous definition? Famous definition is al-khitab al-shar'i al-muta'alliqu bi-af'al al-mukallafin. Okay, it is a khitab shar'i, basically the ayah of the Quran or the hadith, which is connected to the actions of the individuals. Okay, af'al meaning actions, fi'l, of the mukallafin, of the duty bound individual, all of us basically. That was the famous definition. Okay, reference is al-Qawaid wal-Fawaid. This is from Shahid Awwal. This book is from Shahid al-Awwal. Okay, al-Khitab al-Shar'i al-Muta'alliqu bi-af'al al-Mukallafin. That was the famous definition. He says this is wrong because فَإِنَّ الْخِطَابِ, the khitab meaning the actual statements, are kashif anil hukm. They just uncover for us what the hukm is. Okay? Just like the red light, it is just kashif of the hukm. Red light itself is not the hukm. Red light is just red light. Wal hukm huwa madlul al khitab. The hukm, the law, is just signified by the khitab. Okay? The khitab is just there to kind of point to it. Okay, this is a distinction that he has made. Secondly, he says, أضيف إلى ذلك, I'm going to add to this, that the hukm shar'i لا يتعلق بأفعال المكلفين دائما. He says the hukm shar'i doesn't always have to do with the fi'l of a person, doesn't always have to do with the actions of a person, بل قد يتعلق بذواتهم أو بأشياء أخرى ترتبط بهم. Sometimes the hukm shar'i could actually be connected to the essence of a person or even to things that relate to a person. What does that mean? So we thought hukm shar'i and fiqh has to do with the actions of a person. Hukm shar'i should be something, is haram for you to do something. It is mustahab to do for you to do something. That's what it means. Like it's connected to a fi'l. He says no. Sometimes a hukm shar'i is connected to just the essence of a person, and sometimes it is connected to other things that are related and connected to a person. Why? Because the hadaf, the purpose of a hukm shar'i is to organize the human life. And this human life can be organized sometimes with a khitab, which is متعلق بخطاب متعلق بأفعال المكلفين. Sometimes you can organize a human life by giving a statement that has to do with their fi'l. For example, if I say salli wa sum, salli means fast, so it is wajib for you to fast. or it is wajib for you to pray. Pray, and it is wajib for you to fast. وَلَا تَشْرِبِ الْخَمْرِ, and do not drink alcohol. So it is haram for you to drink alcohol. So these are all fi'l. Okay, salli means you have to pray. Som means you have to fast. Okay, la tashrib al-khamr, this is also a fi'l, like do not do something or do something. These are all actions. Just so he's saying, just like a hukm shar'i is connected to your fi'l, likewise the tanzeem of the hayat of an insan can also be achieved by giving a khitab which is muta'alliq, which is connected and related to their essence or to other things that exist in their lives. For example, those khitabat that organize the relationship of marriage, zawjiyah, and they make a woman a wife of a man, okay, under specific situations. Okay, so look at the concept. You say in Islam there is something called zawjiyah. Zawjiyah is not a hukm shari. What's zawjiyah? Zawjiyah means a marriage relationship. Does Islam have this as a hukm shari? Is there a hukm shari that says that, you know, when you recite a certain formula, a relationship gets created between these two individuals, which is called zawjiyah? You say, yeah, there is. Well, okay, does this have to do with their actions? No, you just say I'm a zawj. I'm a zawj doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean you are doing something. It just means you are a wife or you are a husband. Those things are part of Islam. Islam has ordained these to organize your life, but they don't have to do with you doing something or not doing something. Okay? Zawjiyah, for example. Or for example, al-milkiyah, ownership. Okay, this ownership, this concept of ownership, Islam has mentioned this as a concept. But with this concept, a person becomes an owner of a wealth of any entity under certain conditions. These ahkam, zawjiyah and milkiyah, ليست متعلقة بأفعال المكلفين. Okay, بل الزوجية حكم شرعي متعلق بذواتهم. Zawjiyah is connected to their essence, and milkiyah is a hukm shari, is muta'alliq to some wealth, some entity. Okay, so that's why he is saying, that's why it is better to change the famous definition with what we have said. And what have we said? What has Shaykh Sadr said? That أن الحكم الشرعي هو التشريع الصادر من الله لتنظيم حياة الإنسان. Okay, it is a hukm. It is a hukm shari. Hukm shari. It is a legislation that is uttered by Allah subhanahu wa taala to organize human life, whether it is related to a human's actions or their essence, or to other things that are present in their day-to-day life. Okay, so that's something that is what he is mentioning. But he says we can do a division of the hukm shari. Okay, so hukm shari, we figured out that it is to organize human life. But he says that you can do a taqseem. You can divide hukm shari into two. تقسيم الحكم إلى تكليفي ووضعي. That hukm shari can either be a hukm taklifi or a hukm wadi'i. And these two are important. We're going to understand what these are. He says that he says, look, there's a hukm, one type of hukm shari is connected to the fi'l of the insan. Okay, one type of hukm is connected to the af'al of the insan, of the human actions. And they kind of point humans towards the appropriate suluk that they have to do in different aspects of their life. Okay, personal life, family life, life of ibadah, societal life, communal life. Okay, and the Sharia has come and organized all of these aspects of our life. For example, كحرمة شرب الخمر, haram to drink alcohol, or وجوب الصلاة, or وجوب الإنفاق على بعض الأقارب, meaning paying money and supporting some of your family members, or إباحة إحياء الأرض, reviving earth, like farming, and if there's a dead place of land, you can kind of revive it. It's mubah, okay? or wujub al-adli ala al-hakim, or it is obligatory for the hakim to be adil, he has to be just, okay? So one type of hukm shari has to do with the fi'l of a mukallaf, but wal-akhir, a second type of hukm shari, it is not to do with telling a person, what do you have to do in their suluk. Rather, it is every hukm that is legislated in a way that it has some ta'thir, some impact indirectly in the human life, in the human conduct. Not directly. The first one was directly. It is wajib to pray. It is haram to drink alcohol. But there are other types of rulings that don't tell you directly what you have to do. They will have an impact on you indirectly. They will have an impact on your conduct indirectly. So for example, the ahkam which organize the relationship of marriage, فإنها تشرع بصورة مباشرة علاقة معينة بين الرجل والمرأة. Okay, so zawjiyah creates a specific relationship between a man and a woman, and then it impacts their lives indirectly. Okay, because once the woman becomes a wife, she has to conduct herself and behave herself in a very specific way in front of her husband. ويسمى هذا النوع من الأحكام بالأحكام الوضعية. These second type of rulings are called حكم وضعي or الأحكام الوضعية. But here he explains, he says, look, the relationship between the حكم وضعي and the حكم تكليفي is very, very close. Because there is not a حكم وضعي that exists except that it will always have a حكم تكليفي with it. So what do we mean? That every time there's a حكم شرعي وضعي, there will be a حكم تكليفي with it. So for example, let's say there's a حكم وضعي that is placed somewhere between a man and a woman, that there is now a relationship of zawjiyah between them. Zawjiyah means this woman has become a wife, this man has become a husband. Okay, that's something that has organized their life, and Islam has approved of this. It is a legislation. Allah has allowed for this legislation. But that itself doesn't tell them what they have to do. But the moment zawjiyah exists, the moment a hukm wada'i exists, it will now create hukm taklifi. So what type of hukm taklifi does zawjiyah create? So it creates, for example, wujubu infaq az-zawj ala zawjatihi. The husband now has to support and financially maintain the wife. Wa wujubu tamkin ala zawja. Okay, or the wife has to sort of be available for the husband. It is obligatory for her to be like that. Or al-milkiyah, ownership, is a hukm shar'i wadi'i as well. But it also creates certain hukm taklifi. For example, it is haram to do tasarruf, to basically interfere and trespass into the property of somebody else. Okay, except by their permission. Okay, you have to take their permission, otherwise you cannot interfere and go on their property or use their property or take their property by any way. So that's what milkiyah creates. So milkiyah on its own, okay, you say I am the owner of this. That statement, I am the owner of this, yes, Islam legislated the idea of ownership, and it is allowed. You can have ownership over many things. But that statement, I am the owner of this, doesn't tell you anything. Okay, so what? Well, Shaykh is saying, no, anytime these hukm wad'i are created or exist, there are going to be hukm taklifi along with it. So so now we're coming back to hukm taklifi. Okay, we're coming back to hukm taklifi. And he says there are divisions of al-hukm al-taklifi. And these are divisions that everybody knows. All Muslims know about this. أقسام الحكم التكليفي ينقسم الحكم التكليفي. Remember, al-hukm taklifi was the hukm that is connected to the actions of a human directly. He says there are 5 types of hukm taklifi. Not hukm wada'i, okay? There's no divisions of hukm wada'i like that. There are just divisions of hukm taklifi. What are the 5 divisions? Number one is al-wujub. Please pay attention to the Arabic over here, right? He's not saying wajib, okay? Or he's not gonna say mustahab or haram or makruh or mubah. He's using, and because there's a difference. But there's a difference between wajib and wujub. Later on, you will realize what the differences are. So he's using the words very precisely. Okay, there's a hukm taklifi is of 5 types. He's using the word al-wujub. Wujub is a hukm shar'i that pushes a person towards a thing, towards an action, bidarajatil ilzam, to the extent that it becomes necessary for a person to do that. For example, wujubu salat, okay? Or for example, wujubu i'anat al-mu'awwizin ala wali al-amr, or the ruler, the wali amr, the obligation of them to help the people who are in need, okay? So that is wujub, obligation. Al-istihbab هو حكم شرعي يبعث نحو الشيء الذي تعلق به بدرجة دون الإلزام. So istihbab is also حكم شرعي that pushes a human towards an action, towards a conduct, but the extent and the degree of it is not to the extent of ilzam, to the extent of necessity. And therefore, there is an aspect of sort of rukhsa, freedom, like meaning you don't really have to do it. Okay, for example, كاستحباب صلاة الليل. Like Salatul Layl, it is recommended. It has istihbab, it is mustahab to do it, but there's also a rukhsa, there's a type of exemption that is also given by God. So you don't have to necessarily do it. There's no ilzam in it. So that was the second type of hukm taklifi. Third type of hukm taklifi is al-hurma. And this is the hukm shar'i that prevents and stops a person from doing a thing. Bidarajatil ilzam, to the extent of ilzam, meaning it is haram, it is necessary for you to stay away from it. Okay, for example, hurmatir riba, usury, or hurmatir zina, adultery and fornication, or selling weapons to the enemies of Islam. These are called hurma. Hurma is a hukm shari that pushes a person towards not doing something. Okay, sorry, it refrains, not pushes, refrains a person from not doing a conduct to the extent of ilzam. It is necessary for them to stay away from it. And karaha is a hukm shari that once again restrains and prevents a person from engaging in an act, but to the extent that there is no ilzam in it. Okay, so he says it is like the istihbab. Okay, it is like istihbab in the sense that you are recommended not to do it. Okay, so mithalul makruh khalful wa'ad, like breaking a promise is makruh. Okay, it's makruh basically. So it is not haram, but it is highly detested. Allah does not like it, but it has not reached the stage of ilzam that it was, like hurmatul zina, for example. No, it is not haram like that, but it is not recommended, is detested by God still. And the fifth hukm shar'i is al-ibaha. Okay, this is ibaha, is when the shari', meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gives a opportunity for the mukallaf to pick whatever mawqif he wants, pick whatever conduct he wants. Okay, he can either do the action or not do the action. It is up to him. Why is this there? It is there because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given this individual the pleasure of freedom. Like, you're free over here, enjoy. Whether you want to do an action or not do an action, it is mubah. So falahu, for the person, an yaf'al walahu an yatruk. So it is up to the person whether they want to do the action or whether they want to abandon the action and not do it. So this is the thing. Now I want to show certain discussions or certain charts over here. There are many charts that have been made by Iranian students and stuff about usul. So this one is for al-Halaqa, and it kind of shows you the overview of the entire book. Okay, so there are many, many, like dozens. You can find these all over Iran in like Hausa groups and even on websites. So let's kind of review what we have done. Okay, so this is the table of contents of the first halaqah. This is in Farsi. Okay, so he said this is saying that there are two sections of this book. One is the introduction, and the second is the actual discussions. Okay, so where did we start off from? We started off from the muqaddamat up here. In the muqaddamat, in the introduction, we did the ta'arif of ilm al-usul, we did the mawdu of ilm al-usul, and we talked about the benefits and the importance of ilm usul and ilm al-fiqh, and the relationship of usul and fiqh, and the interaction between usul and fiqh. Okay. Then there was a discussion on istinbat, on whether it is allowed to do ijtihad. Over there was an introduction that Shaykh Sadr gives, and he goes through the history of the word ijtihad. So this was all that we have done, And then in this lesson we continued, and we said there's something called a hukm. So he was still defining, right? He did the definition of usul, but then he went through what is anasir al-mushtarika and what is the process. He talked about istinbat. So the whole process, what is it? Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? And then the last word in the definition was al-hukm al-shar'i. So he did a discussion on that. He did the definition of ta'arif of hukm, definition of hukm, which is a legislation that is given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to organize human life. And then he went to the aqsam of the hukm, the division of the hukm. Hukm a hukm shar'i is divided into two. It is either hukm taklifi or it is either hukm wad'i. Hukm taklifi has to do with the fi'l of the mukallafin, the actions of the person, and hukm wad'i has to do either with the essence of a human or any other entity that is related to a human, like money or a house or wealth or anything like that. And then he did one other division, which is the division of the hukm taklifi, which are 5, right? Istihbab, which is wujub and istihbab and hurma, kiraha and ibaha. Then, there is basically the next chapter will be he kind of gives a fahrist of the mabahis asli. Right. In the next chapter, he will just kind of go through the different discussions. He will say, inshallah, we will cover that in the next lesson. We won't do it right now. But he kind of divides he kind of gives an explanation of what the book is. So we will kind of go through this quickly in the next lesson. And then, inshallah, we'll come to the second section of the book, which is Mabahis Asli. And we will begin with the first chapter, which is going to be, Mabadiun Amma. Let me see, what do we have? Yeah, so in the next lesson, we will come here and we will do a quick, so chapter 8 is Hujjatul Qat. Alright, chapter 8 is Hujjatul Qat. And then we will go on to the next chapters. After that, Adillah al-Muhraza. Inshallah, we will explain this in the next lesson. This is also another division, another sort of chart that summarizes what we have done so far. So we are in Usul al-Fiqh. We are in the Muqaddamat. Okay. A later chapter will be called Adillah Muhraza and Adillah Amaliya. We haven't gotten to those yet. We're going to basically go here in the next lesson or two. So, or basically in the next lesson we will start over here. But Muqaddamat we have finished. So we did the Ta'arif, we did the Ilm al-Fiqh, we started with that. Then we did what is Ilm al-Usul. We talked about Anasir al-Mushtarika. We did, then we talked about basically, the Mawdu, the place of Ilm al-Usul and how it changed, and the change in the meaning of the word ijtihad, and so on. Then we came to Hukm Shar'i over here. Hukm Shari, Shaykh Sadr says that it is a qanun, is legislation that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the organization of human life, whereas other ulama said it is khitabatu shar'iyya in the kitab and sunnah, which are the laws. But Shaykh Sadr says no, they are not the laws themselves, they are just pointing towards the law. So that's what it was. And then he said you either have hukm taklifi or you have hukm wad'i. Okay. So hukm wadi, some other examples he gives is ritsul khamr. So for example, the khamr being najis is a hukm wadi. Okay, it is not a hukm taklifi. So you say alcohol is impure, or certain other things are impure. These najasat, tahara, these are all hukm wad'i, by the way. But with each hukm wad'i, some law gets created. For example, if you say alcohol is najis, then that means you cannot. So what's the hukm taklifi of that? You cannot pray in clothes that have the najasa on you, that has the alcohol on you. So it creates a hukm taklifi for you. So anyways, hukm wadi, then hukm taklifi. Then hukm taklifi, you had these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 types of hukm taklifi over here. So anyways, alhamdulillah, we have finished quite a few chapters in these 2 lessons. In the next lesson, we will once again quickly summarize chapter 7 very quickly, because it is just sort of a table of content that he does about what is about to come. And then chapter 8 is important, and we may spend maybe the next lesson we will try to do chapter 7 and 8 inshallah. So I hope this has been beneficial so far. We will see you in the next lesson. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.